out here, and not everything has been shut down, at least from what Charlie told me, but
Hi, all.
Hi.
hey, there you are, fearless leader.
I had a little panic there. My system wouldn't boot up here. The Canadians were saying I shouldn't have access to the US. Anyhow, here I am.
We'll bail you out, okay?
That's great. So we got Victor yet or not? No, or Sarah?
No.
No, okay.
I'm Victor.
Wait a couple minutes. So I'm broadcasting from the upper floor of my our house up here at the river.
See, you have the air conditioning going, Zell, huh?
Oh, you can see the air conditioning behind my head.
Right.
It's a big fan. Actually, we woke up and it was 55 degrees this morning.
I understand that
Victor,
if you go into Canada, you have to self-quarantine for 2 weeks, right? So
you can't go to Canada. I mean, you can go to Canada, but they won't let you in. Unless you have a work permit. Basically, the border's closed.
yeah, actually, we have a friend. We have a friend who's from New Brunswick, and she still has family in New Brunswick, so she has special permission to cross the border. But once she's there, she has to quarantine for 2 weeks before she can move about.
Right.
Excuse me, Zell,
Yes.
I gave you the permission to be a host and Sarah's an attendees. Can you promote her?
Is Sarah in?
She's in the attendees portion. So if you go down to the participants and click on the participants icon.
Okay, participants, I've got 8 right now.
Yep.
You need to
And
admit
up
her.
top where it says attendees 1,
Oh, yeah.
you just have to promote her if you right click
her
next
to
to
the
her
list.
name.
Gotta let her in.
Allow her to, what say allowed to talk?
You can promote her to panelist.
Okay, more. Promoter to panelist.
Yep.
Promote to panelist. Okay, got that. Good. Okay.
So she should be
Sarah.
rejoining us in a minute.
There you are.
There we are.
And then you guys are all set to start when you'd like to begin.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
You're
Thank you
welcome.
very much, Lisa.
All right, have a good meeting.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye. Patrice, you're on.
Yes.
I am here, but I am using only audio today. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm just here as a guest. I have nothing to
Okay,
say.
we'll have you on board. So I guess the only person we might be missing would be Maggie, but I don't think
And Victor.
Pardon?
And Victor.
Victor's right here.
Victor's on.
Oh, where are you? There you are. Okay.
There we go.
He's that handsome guy in the bottom right corner.
Look like a boat interior, Sarah. You're back.
Okay, I've got everybody. Okay, so why don't we, we've got a quorum, so why don't we get started? Call a meeting to order at 5:05. And we'll have a roll call. We've got everybody on board, including Mickey. So let's go forward. I think Jesse had sent the minutes around earlier, and so if there are no issues with the minutes, why don't I hear a motion?
Move to accept.
Okay, who moved it?
Frank.
Frank moved it. Sarah seconded. Good.
And
Okay.
thank you, Sarah, for the help with them.
Oh, you're welcome. It was an
Okay. Do we
education.
have any public comments from anybody? Okay, hearing none. Anybody have any announcements they wish to make? Okay, the only thing that I was going to bring up under announcements is I think we had an election last year at this time for our sitting chairman and secretary. And do you want to bring up at the next meeting to either re-elect or have the current group continue to act as your leaders, or what would be people's feeling about that? I felt I need to bring it up because it's I don't want to hog the show necessarily here. Any comments?
I think you're doing just great. I would nominate you to remain the fearless leader of this group.
Okay, I see Sarah's fanning her face like, phew, good, that's good. I'm off the hook.
Phew.
Jesse, anything comment from you?
No, I think it's just great. And I don't think we elected you. Well, actually, the mayor appointed you, so I'm not
Oh,
sure. Was
Well,
that-
we have the ability to unseat you.
Yes, I think that's correct.
Always, always.
But no
always.
desire to, but no desire to.
Frank, do you have any comments or thoughts?
No comment. This is,
Okay.
you're doing a great job, both of you, and there is no need in my mind to change course at all.
Okay, and Mickey?
Keep going, Sal.
Okay, we'll do that. Okay. So let's go on to new business. And I will, by the way, I know Frank's got another birthday party and Sarah's
No,
got
no.
a couple of dinner. Oh, no. Well, I thought
Well,
we could.
I shouldn't say that. We'll have dinner, but
Oh, okay.
we're
We'll
clear
try to
that.
get through this pretty quickly today if we can.
Thank you very much.
do that. So I had last time talked about the need to try to bring together the notion of our task force mission of resiliency and sustainability with and how it might relate to the whole issue around the COVID-19 pandemic. And so I think Victor and Sarah have had a conversation, so I would ask either Victor or Sarah or both to make some comments about this. But before I let them loose, I had explained to both of them that I was feeling, particularly as this thing has dragged on, but the pandemic, while we clearly learned some lessons, I don't think all the lessons are in yet, partly because of just the way things are being handled on a national basis. So it's not clear to me that we have got a full set of lessons learned yet from this, but I will let Victor and Sarah go ahead.
Victor, why don't you start?
Okay, well, I don't have any very formal thoughts, but I think we've all imagined or thought that COVID-19 may be a bit of a dress rehearsal for what's coming up over the next years to decades with climate change. And obviously, if we can learn some lessons, what are they? And are we really learning and taking it to heart? So the things that I am just taking note of is the fact that COVID-19 was predictable in a vague way. I think Bill Gates gave a TED talk. He called it 2-3 years early, but without any specificity. And there's a difference between the onset of COVID and climate change, because COVID is unknown and we don't know when the next pandemic will happen. But climate change is totally predictable, is certain. There is no guessing. So that's a difference that I think tells us that we cannot simply just not get ready for it. The second is the fact that for COVID, we have had to shamefully improvise a response, and that is inexcusable as a country. There are other countries that, by virtue of their decades-long investment and organization, and frankly, the building and nurturing of civil society, have been able to have vastly better results than us. And it's not just Asian countries. We have countries in this hemisphere that are among the top performers, but none of them improvised a response. We have, and shame on us. In spite of the heroic, and I acknowledge all the heroic work that is going on, it doesn't take anything away from that. So climate change is coming our way. It is certain. We cannot afford to improvise. I think when we think about COVID, or when I think about COVID-19, the next the next thought is, well, this too shall pass. Climate change shall not pass. We will be stuck for millions of years with greenhouse gases that we cannot will it to disappear, or technology-wise, we have no means of making it go away. So this is the heritage. And the more practical things that I am trying to connect the dots here is just 2 words about what's happening with COVID-19 in terms of treatment and prevention, and thinking treatment and prevention for climate change. Where do we look for some short-term investments and attention? That it is the most likely treatment for COVID-19 may come up this year from a group of molecules called monoclonal antibodies, which is essentially the laboratory way we have to imitate what I call the best pharmaceutical company in the world, and that is our own body. We produce antibodies in a matter of 7 days to 14 days. We have the first crop of antibodies already being developed, highly specific to kill coronavirus. And then after that, another crop of antibodies that last for, we don't know how long, but typically a couple of years. And all we're trying to do is trying to imitate our bodies, the best pharmaceutical company in the world, and the best molecules to do that are called monoclonal antibodies. There are a whole bunch of other drugs that have been used for other stuff, and it's called repurposing a drug. So, but the problem is that in order for, and then there is a vaccine, of course. The vaccine is the best solution because it prevents things. And what is the vaccine analogy for climate change? Well, number one, we do not have a freaking vaccine, and we do not have monoclonal antibodies or anything. And that is just shame on us for coronavirus. But the vaccine cannot be tested until we have a treatment, because you cannot expose healthy volunteers to a vaccine that will prevent the disease unless we have a treatment. Obviously, we cannot test a vaccine against climate change, but in order to do it, what the coronavirus researchers are doing is they're looking at the hotbeds of COVID infection. Otherwise, they won't have enough subjects to test to see if they prevent the disease or not. So they're using geomapping to do that. And they have to track where the disease is coming up. So they say, that's where we have to do the research, because that's where the people are going to be affected the most. And we've been talking about here about identifying who are the people and where are the places that are the vulnerable spots, the weakest link, where we have to, I think we have the responsibility to look ahead and say, we have got to prevent. We don't have the luxury of testing it because we cannot order or command a hurricane or a heat wave to come our way. It would just happen. But that focus on geomapping for the weakest link and the greatest vulnerability is a parallel with COVID. And then if we assume that we're going to have correctly, that we're going to have hurricanes, or we're going to have heat waves and blizzards and the rest, and who knows what other droughts, do we have a treatment? And I think we do. I think what we've learned over the last year is that at least for acute surges, we can probably handle it to some extent, water, power, even healthcare, a whole bunch of things. But those events come and go, like COVID-19, they are acute events. So in general, I think this is just being a phenomenal parallel to what the type of thinking that we need to do. But the question is, can we react to something that is evolving slowly, or are we going to be tempted just to take care of events? And if we do that, I think it will be a half job and not the full job. So that's it. I don't know how long that took me, maybe too long.
No, but I do think that's sort of the fundamental issue here. We have watched a world respond to a crisis that they actually see as a threat to themselves, rather amazingly. I mean, not universally, but rather amazingly. And sort of as the, don't even talk about it or think about it book is that I think our challenge with climate is to make it similarly urgent and important to individuals. And, people are trying to do that, but that, and I've used the analogy before, but had a Hiroshima bomb dropped every week somewhere in the world, we would have banned nuclear weapons an eon ago. And it's sort of the same thing. How do we create that sense of personal investment and risk? And I think what Americans, let alone the rest of the world, have done in response to this is pretty incredible. Would we have ever thought that there would have been the kind of lockdown there was in this country? And I think our challenge is, how do we, in our education outreach part, start to try to bring that sense of importance and immediacy to what we are dealing with?
Sarah, do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I suspect that that sometime when the woman that's the head of the Ledgelight Health District and the chief of police, it would be actually, I think, good to have a repeat conversation with those two folks at some point down the line and just say, when you reflect on some of the things you learned as part of COVID and what were some of the challenges you didn't anticipate and what things happened, what would you now apply to emergency response and disaster preparedness? And that might be an interesting conversation to cycle back on, or at least for Victor and I to spend some time with those two people inquiring about that. I mean, the other place that I think, and I can't remember on your agenda if this is a separate, so since I'm talking, I'll continue. But the other thing Victor and I talked about was putting together a draft of a plan for the healthcare section and kind of just taking a stab at it, trying to assemble what we have so far, use a couple of the models that we're going to talk about later, and just try to write it up as a straw person for to push forward some of our thinking, and perhaps for the rest of the group to use as they think of their own section. So we sort of said maybe we could get to a draft by September that might be helpful.
Okay. Frank, do you have any thoughts?
Oh, yeah, there's, might start at the beginning with what we have learned from a climate standpoint relative to the COVID.
Yeah.
And I think I sent some material around on that. And the scary part of that, to make a long story short, is that for all of the shutdown, essentially shutting down your airlines, which have been a major contributor upper levels. For example, the clearing of the air in Peking, the water in Venice. When you take a look at what all of that means for that period in terms of carbon dioxide and what it might mean in terms of the long-term climate impacts, if we were to retain all of those shutdowns, we still couldn't make the target 2 degrees centigrade that we've been looking at. So if anything, what the COVID does from the climate standpoint is really point to the urgency of the matter. That if we're going to do anything in any sort of a reasonable time frame, we really do have to get at the problem. And we is everyone. And there's the next chapter. I think the other thing that COVID has taught us, and this is an apolitical statement, that's not asocial, but apolitical. The number of people that are, when questioned, will refuse a vaccine, the number of people that patently neglect the masks and patently ignore the social distancing requests, at least. And someone was saying what they see in all of that is a disdain for science, that people just don't believe. And they don't believe for a whole bunch of reasons, but that's an issue. And it brings me to the last line, which we heard a little bit from a number of presentations so far, and that's policy and political will. How do we foster a policy, a mindset in local administration, government, across the towns that takes climate issues seriously, that take climate issues seriously? And that means setting aside a certain number of dollars and beginning a procedure where we're going to electrify this or that or whatever. And the same thing goes, and I think Sarah said it, the political will, we get back to how we make the issue personal. This COVID is pretty personal for some of us, for all of us, some of us more than others. What it means in terms of our family, what it means in terms of getting together with friends, the personal element. And in all of that, both from the policy standpoint and from the personal involvement, investment in it, I look to education as one of the areas that we really have to pay some more attention to. You heard it, we heard it, when we were talking with the planning department, when we had our circa meeting with planning. They were keen on getting the word out more generally, town council and the community. And I think Sal mentioned some of the conversations we have had over the year on the issue. So I think COVID has taught us a lot. It's like every other tragedy, there's some opportunity, and let's try to take advantage of that opportunity.
That's good, Frank. Thanks. Mickey?
A couple of thoughts. One is that, I think the Obama administration did have a planning panel, a planning office to look at their response to a pandemic. And I think that a lot of what they recommended were in fact what needed to be implemented. And so it was like a shovel-ready instrument to deal with COVID. And a lot of these techniques have been around since the 1918 epidemic. So a lot of them weren't rocket science, but just common sense. And what we really needed then, when this first started to become an issue, and we even more need it now, is leadership that goes out and tells people, look, the patriotic thing to do, the responsible thing to do, the is to wear masks and do some of these things that are not that big a burden on people. Well, I think the same thing is true with some of the issues that we're talking about with resiliency and sustainability. I think that, for example, recycling was something that, we told people, it's the right thing to do, be a good neighbor. And it's not like, in fact, I don't know if anybody's ever gotten a ticket for having not recycled their stuff. We rely on people just being, the majority of people being, good citizens. But you have to have the leadership that's hawking this idea and making it seem like you're really doing something that's, beneficial to society, and you are protecting me and I'm protecting you, whether it's with recycling or COVID. So to my mind, yes, education in a real broad sense. And that's where, I think we need to have people who have access to bully pulpits, whether it be our mayor or our governor or our president, needs to be up there saying, just like during, World War II, get out there and do your bit to help society and help each other. And I'm going to guess that 75% of the people in this country want to do right. So I think that's the message: is that we need to have a plan, but we have to have a leadership that hawks it, that promotes it, and whether you want to call that education or propaganda or whatever it is, using the tools of social media and all of this publicity to get the word out that this is the right thing to do. And I think that's we can go a long way without having people arrested on the street for not wearing a mask. Anyway, that's.
Actually, I think it what both you and Frank have just said. I would make the observation that as I've sort of looked at what's happened with the governor of Connecticut and the governor of New York, and how they have really hammered down or this whole business about using face masks, social distancing, washing your hands, and so forth. And it's really worked in these two states, where at the federal level, the wishy-washiness that's come out of Washington is truly unbelievable. And you were seeing the whole crisis in places like Florida, California, Arizona, and I guess there's some 21 other states that are in that same position where lack of leadership is killing people, literally. It's not.
Well, I think that it seems to me
it's really happening.
It's actually negative. What we're actually getting is negative.
Go ahead, Mickey.
So, because right now what we're getting from the federal level is negative leadership. It's cool to not wear a mask. And so, it's macho not to wear a mask. And so, leadership can go in both directions. And we are getting leadership. It's negative leadership. And so, clearly that's where hopefully the voters can.
Mickey, you're more polite than I'm. I just think it's craziness, but that's right.
Yeah, it is. Well, it's meant.
Sarah?
But anyway,
Sarah,
I think one of the good points you raised, Zell, was this collaborative nature that the Northeast governors have done. And if you go to kind of Frank's point and Mickey's around leadership and around this, stepping up to the plate of what needs to happen. I mean, I think encouraging that broad collaboration in the Northeast across the issues of climate change. I mean, I'm a big fan that, right now in the state of Connecticut, you have these 169 fiefdoms. These are all too small. All these things are too small to make an impact. But if you worked regionally, as we've seen has been successful, I wonder if some of that cross collaboration of the governors might not be directed towards this crisis and other crises in a very effective way. I give Lamont a lot of credit. He has been very open. He's communicated very well. Connecticut right now has the lowest rate amongst all 50 states in the nation. It's got, anyone can get a test who wants one. I mean, it's in really good shape. It'd be nice to take that same model and try to figure out for climate change, what might we do?
And
I think,
Can I?
Victor, go ahead.
Just following up on Sarah's comment. The other interesting lesson learned for me, just trying to keep up with the COVID-19 developments, is that the NIH, which is the largest, most important R&D shop in the world, is acknowledged that with their $42 billion budget, they cannot produce a treatment or a vaccine with the urgency that is needed. So they have partnered with 18 pharmaceutical companies in a collaboration to, it's called ACTIV, ACTIV, and they all stand for something, accelerated coronavirus treatment and so forth. The private sector invests $80 billion a year, twice as much as the NIH, and they have the capacity to scale solutions. So in that diagram, in that spreadsheet that I distributed, there is a role for the town government and to do what is in their description and sphere, but there is a role for the private sector. And I think redoubling our efforts in aligning the interest, because Electric Boat and Pfizer and others are just as interested as we are in being ready for what climate change is going to bring our way. And I think a deeper collaboration, and I would say a more urgent sense for collaborating would be a move in the right direction, because this is too big for the town to tackle all by itself.
Mickey.
Another factor that, and I think what Victor is talking about, this factor is very important, which is to make decisions that are fact-based. And, I think that industry looks at data and looks at facts, and they know that if they want to make money or even stay in existence, they have to keep up with the facts, the data. I think a majority of this country has seen enough of the facts about climate change, about temperature rise and sea level rise and carbon dioxide levels rising to know that that's what the facts are telling us. I think that the polls all show that there's a strong majority of this country that are behind the idea that climate change is real and that human activity influences that and can be, and we need to take action. Again, that comes back to having leadership that also believes in facts and having leadership that can then present those facts in a understandable way, so that and show how the actions that they're proposing can mitigate what the facts are telling us.
It's an interesting point that you're raising, is the analogy of, the climate denier set, which at least from what I've been reading, I don't know if this matches for everybody else, is that it looks like that's really not a very big part of the population group anymore. But it's an interesting analogy of those who, denied science through COVID and those who attempt to debunk climate change. And I wonder if there isn't some power in that analogy going forward as we do go out and do education and outreach on some of the topics.
There is, Sarah. I was listening to an interview with Francis Collins, who is the head of the NIH.
NIH, yeah.
And the problem with what you just mentioned and what Mickey mentioned is that myths and non-science that permeates, for example, vaccine, anti-vaccine, people.
Right, the anti-vaxxers.
Anti-vax crowd. Even though it is, we all know it is not science-based, they have an outsized impact on policy. Huge outside, even though they're small, they're a vocal minority. And to the extent that our leaders side with that faction and augment their voices. Let me tell you that in developing the vaccine, the protocols to have a safe and effective vaccine for COVID, the NIH and the researchers are worried that the anti-vax crowd are going to demand exceedingly high levels of safety, in particular, not just effectiveness, because they're going to oppose
Anything.
a COVID-19 vaccine because of the way it's prepared, because of this, because it has fetal tissue, whatever the argument will be. They have mapped out all of this, and now the protocol requires a much larger effort, larger number of people, larger budgets,
Longer.
because of a myth. So if we think that they're low numbers, and they're I don't want to insult this group, but they have their way of thinking that is not science-based, does not impact on how and what we do. It's just not so. It is hugely important, and Frank, I think education is hugely important, but there has to be, I don't know if there's anything else that we can do to
The leadership thing, Victor,
Yeah.
the leadership thing.
the leadership is just so important.
Well, in fact, I think in some ways our community does have the leadership, and
No, I
she's
was
listening.
in the
She's
community.
listening on the other end of the
I was talking,
telephone. And so I think we have a town council, a leadership there that is supportive of what we're doing and is willing to move this thing forward. So I think we've got a leg up on a lot of communities, but we have a long and heavy lift to go. Okay, so at this point, I'm asking, do you think we should continue this conversation, or do you want to switch to one of the other topics?
I just want to clarify that I was meeting national leadership, absolutely not local leadership. And just in response to Sarah's thing, there are a lot of efforts on climate among the mid-Atlantic and New England governors on climate. And I think that those are things that we should really be supportive of. Unfortunately, Connecticut is not in the front of that pack. Massachusetts, New York, and other states are, Rhode Island.
Well, maybe this will be something that, the governor might wish to consider with the.
No, it comes down to budget stuff. It comes down to budget.
Yeah, sure.
Which we will get to on other things. But yes, Zell, I think we should move on.
Okay. One other thing I was going to add to this, because it was brought up about, and Mickey, you brought up about having a policy for our local town. And I think Jesse and I've talked about this. I think we would like to put together a straw man draft of a one-pager for this on that very point for our September timeframe. And I think it ought to be very short, very crisp, but it sets a general overall direction that the community ought to take and how it ought to consider resiliency, sustainability, and climate change in its overall breadth.
Oh, that's great. I'm glad you
And
guys are putting that together because that's been something we've consistently heard.
Yeah. And anybody want to help in that, I'm happy to, you know, to do that. I think both Jesse and I feel that, you know, Connecticut does have the SEPA, and there is the National Environmental
You can
Policy
tell
Act.
them what that is. Tell them what that is. Tell them what that is, Sal.
Oh, okay. That's the state Environmental Policy Act, which basically lays out what the overall principles are that the state should operate under. And the national one is the one under the impact statement process, which I'm pretty familiar with. That's only a 2.5-page law, actually. It's very short. And I think we can craft something that would be appropriate for the town of Groton. Anyhow, we'll make a draft and circulate it and see what you guys think.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Okay, so shall we move on to the next, which is a discussion on, and it's going to be very brief, on 2 reports that we have come across. One is the report that came out of Anchorage this past fall, and Sarah is going to give us a quickie on that, and then that'll be followed with Jesse talking a little bit about the effort that was done in
Fairfield.
Fairfield about what they've done. And neither one's perfect match for us, but gives us some idea of what we might do as an overall project or our overall process. And it would be one that would sort of fit into Victor's matrix. Sarah, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, I'm going to try to see. Oh, can you give me the ability to share my screen? It says host disabled screen sharing.
Oh, wait, screen sharing. Okay, yeah, I'm gonna hit the screen sharing button and see what happens. Is that yours or mine?
It's,
Yours.
You have to now, Sarah.
I beg your pardon?
If he enables you, I think you then have to hit screen share on
It
yours.
says host disabled attendee screen sharing. Oh, okay. Here
There
we
you go.
But I'm not sure where the hell I am, but anyhow.
I think that's you. This is not me. That you are showing your screen.
Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing.
Yeah, can you allow me to share so that I can put up that slide?
Yeah.
If you make Sarah a host, then
She is a
she'll be able
host.
to share her screen.
I can make her a host.
Yes. Can you make her a co-host? Are you
Yeah.
hosting the event?
Yeah, let me see. Okay, I'm gonna go down here to Kelly Moore. And I can make you a co-host. Hold on. A co-host, okay.
This
You're a
is going to take
co-host.
us longer to do than to probably share the slide.
Sorry. You're a co-host.
You made Victor the co-host.
Yeah, you made Victor the co-host.
Oh, hell.
Now Victor the slide and Victor can show
Yeah,
it.
Victor, run over.
Hey, a glass of wine.
He's having a glass of wine.
Sorry. Okay,
I hope you guys really love this slide when you see it.
make co-host. Make co-host. Now,
Okay.
It says some, okay, I'm now a co-host. Okay. So
Victor.
now let me see if I can share my screen. Oh my gosh, I can.
I'm
Okay.
gonna leave the screen for a second. I got a yapping dog outside. I'll be right back. Keep going.
Okay. Guys, give me 2 seconds to figure out Finder.
While you do that, I put yapping dog in the minutes.
There you go.
Okay, sorry.
Phone. Oh, here we go. Okay, got it. Wow, it actually worked. Okay, can you guys see this?
Whoop,
Yep.
you
Yep.
spoke too soon.
What?
No, I can see it.
Tapping
I can
dog
see
or
it.
what? Okay, So I did a 1-slide summary of just the Alaska Climate Action Plan and did a little bit of a compare contrast. Of course, you know, how it's kind of silly to compare Groton to Anchorage, Alaska, but there are some important, I think, and interesting, you know, facts around it that we could leverage in thinking it through. So I circulated this, gosh, it must have been 6 or 9 months ago, I think at this point, but I read it through in great detail. It really is an incredible piece of work. Anchorage is, of course, 10 times bigger than Groton, and it constitutes half of the population of Alaska. And so when you put together a climate change plan for Anchorage, you're in essence putting together Alaska's climate change plan. It was divided into 7 sections, and over 1,300 people collaborated to put this together. And so I thought that was a really important point. And they also were able to fund it through some grants. The university participated heavily in it. And again, this I think would have direct analogy for us of what collaborative opportunities might there be across other communities in Connecticut, other agencies or organizations, and then also, who else might you engage? Again, because this is the hub of the state, it's in essence the state plan. They talk a lot in that plan about embedding equity in climate action and talk about a co-benefit of what's good for the community is also environmentally sound. And Mickey, it sort of goes into some of your points about, a community benefit and making it part of the community approach. They also have within their each plan section established goals, timing, and ways to keep track of it that and keep track of progress so that the whole plan can be readily updated on a 5-year cycle, which I thought was also interesting. One of the other parts about it too that may be of interest for us to consider is they have, of course, a large indigenous population in Alaska. They specifically talk about that in the document and talk about that as part of community outreach. It made me wonder whether, we should really consider that, and from both the historical site perspective in our area, but also, the indigenous population as well. I mean, Groton, of course, far smaller section of the state, but I think to me the two the couple parts that really resonated that made me think about, well, what might we do? We're thinking through the sections and what might or might not apply to us, and to help think through different plans and how that might match. What were the collaborative opportunities? And then where might we actually have the opportunity to get some grant money or some funding in order to do our work? And then, and then what learnings to incorporate in it. So those were just my thoughts on looking at it. Again, I think it's a very well done, very comprehensive plan. And it has some attractive features to it.
Thanks. Any comments?
Because I think when we look at Fairfield, it's interesting the things that this plan includes, that Fairfield does, that that Victor put together in our matrix, and what I think it's very informative, what have we left out or what have they left out? So I think as we put them all together, it's very instructive.
Yeah, I do too. Okay, I'll stop sharing.
Oh, you're back.
Okay.
We're all back.
We're all back. So any comments?
I think.
Go ahead. Jesse.
Sorry, I was going to say, I think one thing that's not in Fairfields, and you have been pushing this, Victor, so that's there. Equity, and not just in healthcare, but I think that's an important component.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. We can talk about that in more detail at some point. But this is in the category of a selfish point of view. It's not just altruistic. And we can elaborate on that later, but the impact on our community is going to accrue at the speed that the most vulnerable suffer the impact of climate change.
So Victor,
Yeah.
one of the other things that, I mean, given what's gone on with the inequity of COVID and the health thing, and can't remember if we talked about that explicitly in the COVID learnings, but that equity part is a very, very important part of COVID, of course, too.
Right.
And then everything that's gone on with Black Lives Matter. I mean, it is kind of a very interesting time to sit back from our unit of work and say, well, how do these themes really get embedded and worked through in the climate change aspect?
Well, to me, Sarah, I think that's absolutely right. And I brought it up indirectly when I distributed an
Yep, that's right. Your
and it really boomerangs to the entire community when we have the disparities essentially identify the sector of a population that is, if you want to put it in economic terms, is costing us millions, if not billions, actually trillions. And so absolutely. I was going to say something else, but I lost track. So we can dissect that later, but I think equity is a necessary component of our plan. And
yeah, yep, I do too.
I was going to say that one of the other things that became clear as I looked at those two documents, the Fairfield, for example, gets right down into transportation, which is, as you all know, 38% of our greenhouse gases. They talk specifically about automobiles. They talk about biking and walking. And they also talk about community outreach and education. And so I think there's some, those to me resonate in a very positive sort of way.
But Zell, they don't talk about public transportation.
Well, I noticed that, and I was going to bring that up later, but I'll report about that later.
I'm sure.
Any other thoughts about this?
Yeah, I came back what I was thinking. In looking at the Alaska, the Anchorage plan, the categories are very close to the categories that we came up with very early in our process, and they're in that spreadsheet.
Mhm.
But I think it would be helpful to complete it, to fill in whatever gaps there are, is to contrast Fairfield, Alaska, Groton, any other plan that is similar to what we're trying to produce here. And then go through, number one, the categories. Are we missing something? And just fill in the blank, so to speak. The other factor is the different time frames, very short term, acute events, midterm, and very long term, very different challenges. The equity factor is included in the Alaska. I don't know if the Fairfield had anything,
Nothing.
but it does not, Jesse?
No.
So mark that in. The other factor that I'm maturing this thought more and more is the public-private partnership and the potential benefits of leveraging the private sector, and that will take some work because aligning policies, aligning interests, and so forth will have to be parlay and harmonized in some way. But I think that can be a unique aspect of our report. there may be other chapters, but I think it would be great to say, look at Fairfield, look at Alaska, look at Groton, any other column, and say, we have taken best practices from wherever they are, and we've tried to incorporate all of those in our set of recommendations.
So I guess it would be interesting along that theme to take a look at some of, if the leaders in the Northeast are New York and Massachusetts, to take a look at, you know, whether there's a relevant town our size. I mean, obviously somebody 10 times bigger is kind of a stretch, although there were some great learnings in it. But, you know, it would be interesting to take on some of those states that have similar ecosystems to ours and try to learn from them. How would you go about getting one of those, or know whether or not, you know, Massachusetts has put together a state plan or a town by town or county plan? Or
I don't believe they have a state or a county by county plan, Sarah.
well, they do have
But-
town plans.
But
Though.
we do have, I mean, even in Connecticut, obviously, we're going to look at Fairfield tonight. Old Saybrook has one, Lyme
Yep.
has one.
Right.
City of Boston has one, which comes more like, you know, Anchorage. But I think there are lots of things. And I guess
Can I give you a call in a
I
minute?
feel very strongly that the matrix that you put together initially, Victor, is really, really good. And what I think we can do is be informed by some of the things that maybe are not highlighted or included explicitly in that plan from some of the ones we've already looked at, and we shouldn't stop looking at others. But I think we're in pretty good shape using that matrix. And when I looked at the Fairfield plan, I tried to just sort of say, okay, what did they include that we haven't, and what did they not include that we have? And actually, part of this comes out to a question to you, Mayor. One of the parts of the Fairfield plan is financial management of the town. I was taken aback by that because I did not think that was really under our purview in terms of sustainability. Obviously, it's an important part of sustainability, but is that something that you are comfortable with us sort of leaving to you?
We trust all of you to give us your best recommendations. So if you all feel that that's an important component that should be included and the council should be considering, then please by all means include it. And then, you know, whatever you provide us, then we can look at and we could see how we can fit things in. But definitely don't, I don't want you to hold back on what you think needs to be done. We're asking you to tell us truly and honestly what we need to be doing. So please include whatever you feel is appropriate in order for us to move forward.
Thank you.
Thank you. Frank?
One other area that comes to mind as you're talking is the regional aspect. When you talk about public transportation in Fairfield, there's probably a good reason that there is no comment on the regional transportation in Fairfield in that report. Because Fairfield is a crossroads for half a dozen towns, and you can walk. I can walk from one end of the town to the other. Not much trouble. So regional. We come up with a plan. Where's Stonington fit into this? ... I think we want to keep the regional in mind as well.
Mickey?
One area that both the Alaska plan and the Fairfield plan have, that's an area that I'm particularly interested in, would kind of like to get my teeth into, is the consumption and waste disposal category. Now, I know we have sewage on our list, but I would like to see that expanded to include solid waste and even contaminants, things that our consumption produces that contaminates the environment and creates public health issues. So that was one category that is could perhaps be modified in our plan, and it's an area that I have a real interest in. Actually, it's interesting that goes back to the 70s when I was on the Groton Conservation Commission and we instituted recycling in town of Groton. So it's a long-standing issue, and I'm quite proud. It's one of the things that I can say that I actually did was to, as part of that committee, is we initially did a voluntary recycling program in the town that's now expanded to mandatory. And you go up and down the street now and there's blue garbage pails and green garbage pails, and it's kind of something really changed there. But it took 30, well, more than that, right back in the middle of 1970s. So 40 years, but it happened.
Mickey, we had an other category that we were waiting for a smart suggestion. I just penciled in waste disposal and contaminants as an area because I don't think we have it covered. So if the group agrees that would be a category, I think great
Is
suggestion.
the suggestion that we take a look at, I think it's a good suggestion, Stonington, Old Saybrook, and maybe one other Northeast plan, and just take a rapid look at the categories and see how we want to match them up. I do agree that the equity category should.
Yeah, and I think there is a difference in the focus, Sarah. Fairfields is really a sustainability plan. Old Saybrook's is really a resilience plan. So I think the degree to which we marry both of them, and that does get into, that's one of the reasons I asked the question about financial management. That's, in my mind, sustainability. We are resilience and sustainability. And so I think the categories that we have included, and when I compared Fairfields to ours, that was the thing that jumped out. The thing that was totally missing in Fairfields was health and equity. And when it was a little unclear because it's only partially done, they're adding pods to it as they go along. The built environment, to what extent does that really include infrastructure? And that was unclear. And that's a big issue for us. And then I think also the communications part, we spent a lot of time with the police chief and others about, maintaining communications in emergency management. That's not a part of Fairfields at all. It is a part of Old Saybrook's, and I would assume it would be part of most other people's. So my own feeling is what we need to do as a task force is have an in-depth discussion, given all the information we've gotten, about Victor's matrix, because I think it's a fabulous starting place. And maybe there are things we need to add to the categories in it, but I think then we're in pretty good shape to take those of us who signed up for different elements of it and start to put it together. And as Zell said, maybe a preamble that is, well, and that was one of the questions. Fairfield focuses very heavily on goals in categories that it has. And we have tended to look a little bit more at priorities of actions. And I think the goals thing is a good one. But I think the town council is also looking for us to recommend priorities of action in those categories.
Patrice seems to want to say something, right?
Yeah. Well, okay. Before Patrice, I'll get to you in a second. So Mickey, I would invite you then to work on the issue of recycling and waste management and the pollutants and contaminants that are on our environment, and actually add that as a specifically to Victor's matrix. And if you're willing to do that, that would be great. Let me see it. Patrice, you've got your hand up.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. And I know I said I wasn't going to say anything, but yet here I am. If you are looking at making comparisons between Groton and other communities, there is a thing, it's DERG is how it's referred to in the educational community. It's DERG, District Economic I can't remember what the other letters are. It's an acronym. But what it does is it's useful for in the education world because it breaks down the towns in Connecticut into, I think it's A through H. And it uses demographic factors to break down the communities. So you can find and compare schools based on Dirge rather than trying to compare Groton to Stonington, because Groton and Stonington are very different, although we're next to each other. So you can find a town that is very similar as far as population, as far as income levels, as far as ethnicities, as far as, all these different factors where you can find truer comparisons. And I don't know if that's appropriate for what you're doing or not. And I don't know if any of the towns in our Dirge are going to have plans in place that you could actually compare. But that's something that I just wanted to throw that out there. And if you'd like, I could find a link to it and get it to Zell, and you guys could take a look and see if any of them ring a bell for you. But thank you for listening.
That would be terrific.
Great
Thank-
idea.
That would, I mean, the thing that I worry about right along here is, I don't have a good understanding of how to get at demographics in a sort of a really good way. And I think this might be a way of starting into that. Because I think we actually have to do that at some point. Other comments?
I just want to say, I think that's a great suggestion, Mayor. And I would say if we can identify a coastal community, which I assume many of them would be, then that would be a good way to search and see if they have something that we haven't thought about and get some of their good ideas.
Is there also anything from the fact that, again, I go back to COVID, and it looked like, at least in a lot of Lamont's reports, he divided Connecticut into 4 regions. And maybe that's applicable only to COVID and it was because of population density, but is there anything around those 4 regions that's helpful?
I don't have any idea.
No.
The one thing that is I don't know the answer to that. I think we know for COVID what are some of the key variables. And clearly inner cities, vulnerable populations are where the virus is going. And that is as simple as looking at a map. And
Yeah.
for us, it will be geography will be, I think, a very
They were geographically done regions.
yeah. I don't know if that was done for administrative reasons, but I have some questions about, and I just don't know the answer. But there is a big study going on about the prevalence of immunity in the population. And there was no mention of oversampling racial ethnic minorities. I think would be a major mistake in the state plan. That just comes to show that I don't know the answer, but if that is not part of the plan, it would be a great example of how they ignore the equity factor in thinking about the prevalence of the disease, because the hotbeds of infections are not in Simsbury, Connecticut.
Yeah.
Patrice, you had something to add?
No, she just sent us the link.
No, sorry, I forgot to lower my hand. I apologize.
Oh,
But
okay.
I sent a couple links for you. One is
Right.
it just shows briefly which towns are in our Dirge, and then the other one is out of date, but it explains what factors are included, and it may or may not be relevant to your purpose, but I just wanted to chime in.
Terrific.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Frank, you had something to say? Frank?
No.
Anybody else? Mickey?
Just to let you know, I attended the Long Island Sound, both the Citizen Advisory and the Scientific and Technical Advisory Committee meetings last week. And the Long Island Sound, pardon?
The blue plan?
No.
No.
This is the Long Island Sound study, the EPA study.
Okay.
And they've set up a new work group. The management committee for the Long Island Sound study has formed a number of work groups built around the the Comprehensive and Management Plan, whatever CCMP stands for.
Right.
And the new one they just set up was a work group that brings together people around Long Island Sound, both on the federal, state, and local levels, to deal with sustainable and resilient communities. It's called the Sustainable and Resilient Communities Work Group. It's headed up by Sylvain de Geese from the Connecticut Sea Grant and his counterpart in the New York State Sea Grant. And I'm hoping to maybe get myself appointed this work group, or at least let sit in on it. But and I think that to some extent it does bring communities together that are like Groton, namely shoreline communities, focused on this, although it also tries to bring in watershed communities that are a little bit more distant from the shore. The thing about this work group is that Sylvain de Geese explained their plan, and it's a very process-oriented plan. Namely, they're going to spend the next year basically trying to get input from, what do they call it? People who have an interest in this subject.
Stakeholders.
Stakeholders, yeah. I know there's some bureaucraties that they get together the stakeholders so they actually don't have a plan for their plan yet. The first year is going to be to make a plan for their plan. And now that process I tend to chafe at myself, but it is certainly an inclusive process. And there was a lot of emphasis on social justice also to be included in that as an important stakeholder. Anyway.
Well, I would encourage you to follow that. And if you think there's anything that you should share with the rest of the group, please do that.
Zell, at some point, I think since we're talking about sustainability, it might be a good idea for you to share. You and I, you mentioned to me in our conversation the importance of the economic development sector, and I don't know if you were planning on bringing that up.
We'll talk about that in a minute.
That's great.
Yeah. Okay, so is there anything more about this, about outside other plans? And I think we've sort of got this pretty well wrestled to the point where we can't go much further at this point unless anybody has any further comments.
Are we taking an action to look at a couple more plans? I mean,
I think we should.
Yeah, I do too. And I think we'll learn something. I mean, I agree with Jesse's point that everything points to that we've got a great outline.
Right.
I think we should continue to look at it, not just to confirm that outline, but also to just look at formatting and topics, the amount of time, the time frame, et cetera. I mean, there are other things besides the grid, but so how do we go about getting copies of this and deciding, or who is following up on that?
Well, I mean, I think Jesse would be well suited to look at that which is along the Connecticut coast. And because you have your boat up there in Rhode Island, Sarah, you could look at what's going on the Rhode Island coast, and that would be a good start. And Mickey, because you're messing with the New York folks, maybe that would be a good way to bring that together. So if you guys wanted to take a couple of Google searches to see what you could find out, that would be great. And that's, I know, a lot of work, but that's how we do it.
And I remember when you and I went to that conference, there was a guy there from Rhode Island who talked about it.
Rhode Island has done some great stuff.
They have, yeah.
One of the things we've talked about, and summer may be a problem for this, and COVID obviously is a problem too, but taking the grid that Victor has put together and really spending a lot of time as a task force looking at that and saying, okay, what have we left out of these things? Because I really do. I mean, I look at the plans I've looked at, I don't think there's much that's more comprehensive than what we've kind of put together. I think the elements that might go into it could be informed by other towns and things.
Mhm.
But I think we're in good shape about that. I think it's like,
I
okay,
agree with
guys,
you.
we want to flesh this out.
I agree with you. I agree with you.
I mean, I think we've got what we need, but the advantage of having these other plans, outside plans, is that you get some sense of what other people perceive as possible, and you get some sort of sense that we're not in this by ourselves. And I think that is actually very reassuring
Yes.
myself.
And so Frank, actually, just an aside, but this is sort of what Jim O'Donnell is doing. There was an interesting article in the Times yesterday about the end of the 30-year mortgage.
Oh, yes.
Because, see that?
I saw something on it. I didn't read it, but I did see that.
It would, I mean, sure, Jim saw it, but as we start to try to incorporate what are the implications for the town of having so much a part of our grand list vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, that's pretty significant. And what are Chelsea Groton Bank and other local banks doing with regard to mortgages? So I think if we
There were actually several articles in it, and they may have been triggered by the economic climate that is COVID.
Right.
Dealing with costs of policies for vulnerable properties.
Yep. Right.
And there was some indication in some cases that the costs had actually gone down. And so we're getting back into our sort of pre-2008 mode where they're looking for business, but they may not be particularly careful of where they're looking for business.
So I guess it just,
there's a lot going on in that area.
Back to sitting down with our grid, spending some time as a group, going through each of those categories. What might we be leaving out of trying to address those categories?
Let me say, I think that should probably be our next meeting, whenever that will be. Well, that should be probably our key focus. Should be on that. That's.
Zell, just thinking about what you're saying. There's one section of that matrix that is that local government is the town. That's who we are answering to. But there's another section that is private sector. And I don't know, do you think it would be a good idea to invite Electric Boat, Pfizer, and other big players in Groton to say, we are thinking about policies to enhance our resilience and sustainability. From your point of view, you may be doing your own thing, but what do you think would be town of Groton policies that will that are aligned or that we would like to hear about that would be synergistic with our ideas, and what are the areas of collaboration that we can get more in detail?
Well, I mean, to that very point, and it's really a D on our agenda here. We can skip to that. Basically, I'm beginning to feel that what we need to do is we need to meet, for example, with the Groton Conservation Commission, the Planning and Zoning Commission, Economic Development, the Housing Commission, Groton Long Point, the Groton Town Council, actually in its entirety, the City Council, and NOANC. And then I would add to that, as you'll see, I have organizations on there, and I would add to that we meet with someone from Pfizer, someone from Electric Boat, the University of Connecticut, and the U.S. Navy as being the very large and biggest of the, and I'm not sure that's a complete list, but have an opportunity to meet with them just to basically say, what do you think? How do you think you might be able to partner with local government to make something really happen here? I mean, I've got a whole bunch of ways I think they could do it, but they may have some ways that I've never even thought about. Now I know that slows the process down, but as I've gotten into this more and more, it is very clear that we've got to do our homework. But that's go ahead, Frank.
I feel very strongly that we have to get together with this. This is you, Victor. That additional meetings right now with people like Pfizer and the rest is premature.
Okay.
I want to have an idea of what it is we're trying to do and achieve. And so we have at least an outline what we're trying to do and achieve. And then we can begin to fill in some of the doings of that. But right now, we're to some extent gathering information in a vacuum. And you have a framework outline to work with. Let's get this one fairly well nailed down. That's not to say that it won't be subject to some change. You come along and say we ought to add another category, or we got to really think about what we're dealing with here. But I think that if we went to Pfizer right now, we just say, well, what do you think about resiliency and sustainability? For an hour, they can talk about it, and so forth. The same thing for the Navy. The Navy probably has their own, already has, talk about regional. The Navy has their own sustainability and resilience plan right now.
And I know Electric Boat has already done a lot of stuff on climate change.
Yep.
I mean, they've upgraded most of their motors, for example, electric motors throughout their facilities to save energy.
Right.
And they've just done that. Well, okay. Any other comments on this point?
So I guess one of my questions is, in this age of social distancing, do we think we can effectively do that with this grid? Do we take each category? And I mean, that's going to be a long meeting, or we have to spell it out through a couple of meetings to have the lead persons that are assigned to each of those sort of say what they envision being included in that, and to get input from others. Is that sort of the best approach to going about that?
I don't know that there is such a thing as a best approach, Jesse. I think there are probably options.
Okay.
And we have to choose one and stick to it to the extent that there is consensus that that is a good one, because there are probably several very good ones. Going back to Sarah's comment about our conversation, we thought that it might be helpful to put a structure to how we fill in the blanks, the cells, if you want, in the matrix. And I am pretty sure that every sector is going to have its own nuance and categories and so forth, but some kind of uniformity about short sections, background and significance or something like that, and then issues and then priorities. But I don't know, Sarah and I talked about getting together and brainstorming about what a good structure would be. But if you all want to do that collectively, and maybe if we come prepared to do that, if we have to do some thinking ahead of time, Sarah, we can meet and put our heads together about the healthcare part.
So I agree with you that having those categories, and I think the lead people definitely need to do some prep work for that discussion. So as a non-techie, Victor, your sub, I can go through that, but then you've got the example of what you're dealing with. Is there a way to take those subcategories and let me just do them in a Word format, as opposed to the format, just say, okay, these are the subcategories. That would be really helpful to me.
Yeah, that was their original idea. I mean, we didn't say it. I didn't say it anyways. But the idea is this is just a matrix, an outline. Then we go to the pros and then strive for some for conciseness, which is the other challenge.
And I think putting it back into that matrix may make all sorts of sense, but it's a tough one for me to deal with sort of the fundamental suggestions, framing, whatever.
So Jesse, I think your point's a good one. And it's, we should probably strive to each section, write something in Word. You can always figure out a different format because at some point we're going to want to package this thing.
Right.
Be a good looking, kind of concise document, right? But before we get all the way there, I think we need to get the thoughts down in a simple way.
That would be helpful to me because I'm simple.
Well, elegant way then.
Very elegant, Jesse. So do you want to take on that task?
I'm sorry, what?
Yeah, right.
Take
What?
that task on of converting Victor's matrix?
No,
to-
I would just like Victor to sort of take the categories, which I can barely open, and just say, what are these different elements that are supposed to be under my buildings, whatever other thing it is.
Yeah, what I heard Sarah say was, I'm going to look at that
Grid.
resilience
Yeah.
section
Absolutely.
and put together a few hundred words on
Right,
natural environment, topography, landmass, and salt marshes.
that's correct.
Correct.
Right. Not Jesse.
No, that one's yours, Frank.
No, you can take the other 8. You know,
Well, okay, so that's what we want to do at this point?
I think that makes sense, don't you, Zal? I think, we've been together for a year. We've done a lot of listening. I think now it's time. I think the act of making some kind of an attempt to organize it and make a draft, or even to make a draft outline for your section, will now point out what else needs to happen.
Correct.
Yep.
let me drop back for a second. And Victor, I'm looking at number 1 there.
Back in 1 sec.
And you got across the top, resilience, sustainability, preparedness, response, recovery, mitigation, preparedness, response, recovery, and then some other stuff. But you broke down that listing into a couple of categories. One is the event time, and the other is, I guess it's immediately post-event, the 1 to 2 week kind of frame, and then longer term after the event. What I'm hearing now, though, when I look at that and hear what's being said, is we might give you a few words on the beginning of that whole thing, characteristics of the shoreline and susceptibility to damage and that sort of thing, elevations, and then a word or two in each of those categories as we go across the top.
Yeah. What I thought about, thanks for bringing that up, Frank, was a mental map of how we parse each one of these categories. Let's say take natural environment, topography, landmass, et cetera, et cetera. There is an element that is resilience. And I would love to hear, Jesse, your brief description of what Old Saybrook and Fairfield, how one emphasizes resilience, the other emphasizes sustainability, because I am a little concerned that the word resilience means different things among ourselves. And that came up in one of our meetings. And I think we need to clarify that. But think about putting a couple of words in each one of these categories, roads, bridges, etc. What does resilience mean to you, and what are the salient things? And the same thing for sustainability. The other part, the preparedness, response, and recovery, really is an attempt to organize mentally how we think about short-term and midterm and long-term and the different phases. And because we're going to have ideas about what we need to do with emergency response, for example, that's an acute event. That is not a 20-year investment. It's like sometime this fall.
Right.
But if
Okay.
there are other ways that you think would be better, I think we ought to flesh that out.
Mhm.
And simplify things as much as possible. This is my simple version to get us started. And what I would suggest, this is what I would love to see, is if you sort of make each one of those cells, make them big, and put 5 bullet points and short, concise keywords, and say these are the I'm calling them investments in resilience or sustainability for each one of these. And don't write prose, just put the headline of what eventually we will develop with more prose later on. But that's putting meat on the bones. And that allows us, for example, to find if there are areas of duplication that I am sure we're going to have, and there is it's not a bad thing necessarily. And there are areas where there are gaps, where something is missing. But until we have the whole picture and we're able to look at those bullet points and say, okay, we've covered everything, but nobody is figuring out blank or developing.
Right.
Now we're getting into not super detail, but bullet points, high level. Then everybody can go and start putting prose and borrow from what exists out there. Maybe a lot of cut and pasting. That's what we always thought we would do
Mhm.
to put together our plan.
Yeah,
So
and or seek additional information. See, that's
Absolutely, absolutely.
that's the idea there.
Yeah.
Jess?
The only other thing that I'm going to add before I forget is, at least the way I do it in my consulting work, is if I am researching something and I find something that is just a bang up reference on the internet, just go to your star on Google, on Chrome, or whatever on your browser, and save it under that category, because those are all references.
No, absolutely.
And to the extent that we can produce a report where we reference authoritative sources for some of the key points, and we, believe me, we don't want to do that in retrospect. We want to do it and accumulate that as we go, and be very selective. That's the other thing, not just, oh, it's interesting, nice to have. That's
Sounds good.
Jesse,
Yes,
any comment?
sounds good. I haven't actually, Victor, and I think it's relatively simple. I'm not a big PowerPoint person, so I can just open those and I will get the categories that will let me do. I'm happy with bullets. That's just fine.
You don't need PowerPoint. You can put it on paper. How's that?
Oh, what do you know? No, but my printer's not working, Frank. That's the other issue.
Oh, Jesus.
And my tech whiz that came home from Manhattan deserted me 3 weeks ago and moved to Massachusetts.
What about Lou's computer?
Whose computer?
Lou was over in Stonington.
I'm having to draw by your place and see if I can troubleshoot your printer.
That's right.
Well, I think it's dried ink on the pads, Victor, but God bless you.
Oh, okay, other comments? Frank,
No, sir, none. It's clear to me.
Sarah?
So what I'm hearing is that we're going to work on drafts of sections.
Yep.
And that we're going to do that over a couple month period, and take the learning from doing those drafts and talk about it together.
Okay.
Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. And I think
in parallel, look at what other places are doing.
Exactly.
In series.
So I guess my plea would be, at this point, I don't want to be involved in more than one draft. So I know some of us have names, I think we all do, behind multiple ones. I don't feel the need to learn what we may do by doing multiple of those at the same time, for me. Okay, everybody has to do one, but I don't want to do 2 or 3 simultaneously myself.
Okay, we have more topics and we have warm bodies in our committee, in our
We do.
task
We have
force.
more topics than we have bodies. So I just would advocate that we take only 2 or 3 or 4 topics, whatever reflects everybody doing one, and we do that.
But we assigned those. Aren't we talking about the ones we
Yeah,
assigned?
we did.
many
But
months ago?
yes, we did. But I'm saying I don't want to do all my assignments. I'm
No,
not signing up for that right
We're
now.
just starting here. This is
Exactly.
high level.
So what I'm suggesting is I've agreed, Victor and I had a conversation about this, and we were both on the same page of wanting to start a draft so that we learn from the draft.
Right.
And I'm willing to do that for that one, but I don't want to do that for the other ones that I have my name on.
Oh, okay. So you have your name on water, you have your name on health. Which ones? So I think that would be useful
I'm
for
doing
our next
mine for
meeting.
health.
Which ones do different people that have their names on them want to do? So you are saying you want to do health, but not water. Is that correct?
Not at this point. I also think water happens to be in pretty great
Okay.
shape.
That's
in Groton.
So let's just say, for those of us who have signed up for different elements, each one of us will take one of those elements
Right.
and flesh it out before our next meeting. Does that make sense?
Okay, so
That's good.
Vic,
I think over the next couple months, we'll,
Right,
Yeah,
and
over-
I'm not sure we're meeting in July, correct?
right.
well, assuming we're gonna have, I'm probably pushing to not have a meeting in July at this point. Unless you all want to have one, I'm happy to do it, but,
No, I
Well,
think if we
what
put the
people
time
can
in-
do is
well,
work
but-
offline.
Yeah,
first things first.
I don't know that there's any guarantee that we're going to be here in July.
Victor, do you, who, yeah, that's the
Full
problem.
meaning of the word.
Pardon?
We're not.
Okay, so, we need to get this assigned properly. Victor, do you simply want to just, send everybody?
I'm going to share my screen and I want people to just raise their hands and say what they're going to do, what they're not going to do, and we'll call it a day. At least for this stage. Give me a second.
Do it by number. Whoop.
Here, can you all see my screen?
Yep,
All right, so natural environment, Frank and Maggie.
right. That's Bolin.
Okay, so Frank, are you staying on this or not?
Yes, I am.
Okay, I'm going to highlight you and you're on.
You do it in red if you want.
Okay. I need to do.
Not blue, right?
What do you want? All right, I can't edit it while I'm sharing this. Let me just, pardon me, take notes. Okay.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Works. We don't have anybody assigned to this. It's orphan. Sewage, I'm not going to do sewage. I'm going to do health with.
Rick,
Right, yeah.
do you want to do you were working on, some of those issues already. Do you want to take that one on or not?
The bridges, number 2?
Yeah.
I'll take a look at it for this exercise. I don't know
Yeah, I
how much.
think the other part, the land stuff, is more important for him to do, but
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah.
So Frank, you're on bridges.
Yeah, I'll take a look at it. I'll get started anyway on it.
Okay, and so number 3, I heard, Mickey saying he wanted to take that one on.
Well,
That's
this is a
quite what he
different
said.
category. This is a different category. Mickey, is sewage the same thing as waste
Waste
disposal and
disposal.
contaminants?
No.
No, it's,
Yeah. I think sewage is a category in itself.
Sewage, sewage I would be treating, and you've heard some of the resilience measures already, the pump station elevations and the like. So this is the management of the sewage system and the vulnerability of it, but I think let's leave it, that's good. Let's leave it open for a minute.
Okay,
Okay.
okay. Power, Jesse and Zell.
That's fine with me, Jesse.
My initial thing is to work on the buildings part as opposed to this. Happy to do this. And I mean, I think it comes down, I'm certainly happy to do it, but I would rather flesh out the other because I think the power stuff is pretty obvious what we need to do.
Yeah.
Okay,
I'm happy to work
What's
on,
the other category you're on, Jess?
The power is Zell and me, and that's efficiency, renewable, etc.
What's the other one that you're saying you want? to
The
do?
built environment,
Okay,
buildings, it's down further.
down further.
yeah, here.
Okay,
Built
Yeah.
environment, public buildings, private sector, commercial and residential. That's what I would like to focus on right now.
okay.
Good, because I'm not even sure what that is, so that's good. Right.
I will enlighten you.
Thank you.
All right, so
I'll do the
power,
work.
Zell, you want to tackle that?
Yeah, sure.
But do you want to do transportation instead right now, or do you want to do the power?
Well, I do want to do transportation, and I'll do that. I'm already working on that, so.
Yeah, and I think you and I can do the power thing pretty quickly, actually.
Yeah, and I'm familiar enough with the water supply stuff to be able to do. And I don't know, Sarah, you want to join me in that or not?
oh, I will. I just don't, I just am not committing to, given the fact that it's July and August, that I'm gonna write 2 plans by September. It's gonna be
got it.
all I can do to work with Victor to finish up a draft of the health one.
Yeah, I got it.
I mean, right? I got a few other things going on.
Okay, I'll take the water supply.
I mean, I'm happy to help you with it. I'm happy to read a draft. I mean,
Okay.
I have some of the material from that conference we went to,
Right.
but I wouldn't be taking the lead on writing it myself.
Okay.
I'm happy to,
Communication. Who's on that?
Who's on what?
Communications?
All of us.
Yeah,
We all are? Yeah, I guess we are. Well, we can leave that open right now.
Okay, healthcare is settled, built environment, waste. I think we have it.
good,
Okay.
good
Great.
start.
Okay, I'm saving this as another version. I'll send it out. And,
Fabulous.
okay. All right, good show.
Okay, so now I heard at least one person say that, or some of you say that September would be the time frame. Is that correct?
yeah, to have some kind of next draft. You know, I think if we took 2 months to put something together, and then when we meet in September, have
Does
some,
that mean not meeting in August also, Sarah?
no, not
No.
necessarily. I mean, I was just thinking, you know,
Yeah, because I actually think an August meeting could be useful as we start to do this, to say, hey, guys, this is what I'm kind of looking at. What are your thoughts before I try to put this together for a September meeting?
Yeah, bullets.
Okay. Well, sort of skipping over then, I would suggest that we not have a meeting in July unless something comes up that we need to meet about. And we do have an August meeting and then have a September meeting and maybe 2 of them in September.
Sounds good.
How's that work?
Sounds good to me, Zell.
Okay, Frank, is that all right with you? Dr. Boland's frozen.
He's
No,
already
he said
lost
yes. He said it sounds
Oh, okay.
sensible. I thought you were asking Sarah.
And that's okay with you, Sarah?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, well,
My internet's a little bit shaky right now, so I'm having a hard time. I'm on a delay system here.
you're doing
Sorry
pretty
about
well.
Okay, well, let's move on to,
Blaming it on the internet.
pardon?
You blame it on the internet.
Number C, we got a request from the Conservation Commission to look at their 96-page conservation plan. And I don't know who's read that.
Where is it?
Well, you all got a copy.
Oh, we did.
And I had sent it, it had been sent around to you all from the town. And it looks like this.
Oh, okay, yes, you did.
Okay? And you fell asleep after the first about third page, I think. It includes sections on how open space relates to climate change, sustainability, and resiliency. And as far as I'm concerned, this thing is not ready for any kind of really review. Now, I realize I'm saying that in a public meeting, but I've been through this thing and it doesn't get a very high mark at this point from me. There are a bunch of, first of all, it is 96 pages, and there ain't anybody in the town who's going to read this thing. And so my first reaction is, if you can't make it under 20 pages, you haven't got a plan.
Well, you got an executive summary?
Huh?
Any
Yeah,
executive summary?
You got an executive summary that doesn't say anything.
Mhm.
So it's a bit problematic. Now I know three of us have been on conservation commissions in this town before, and you'll remember that those documents were pretty short. I mean, they have gone through and done a huge amount of work,
Right.
but it is most of it's appendix level stuff as far as I'm concerned. And so I don't know what to do about this thing in terms of providing comments to them.
Sal, did you send us, did this come from you? I don't seem to have it in the file here.
Oh, it came from the town, I believe. With you were copied on it. I'll send you it if you haven't got it.
Okay, thanks.
They had like a response by July 1.
Right.
And I'm just not happy making comments on this thing because you get into the weeds so quickly.
What about just a broad statement? And I know they addressed some of this and we talked about it before, about the importance of highlighting coastal areas for marsh migration, importance of maintaining tree canopy. I mean, I don't think we need to wade into the details of this plan. That's why they have a commission. That's what they're doing. But the components that we care about in terms of resilience and sustainability, we could make a general comment about.
Yeah, except the problem is they go ahead and define some of these things in a way that I don't think are
So Zal, when
good science.
When did we get this?
Pardon?
When did we all get this?
Probably 3 weeks ago.
Okay. I have not seen it or looked at it. I haven't looked at it. So like Frank, I don't,
Yeah,
and July 1 is next week, so.
Mickey.
I didn't get it either. I just looked at my old mail and I don't seem to find anything on it. So
I can't find
go
it.
ahead, send it.
Then if you haven't got it, you obviously can't comment on it. So that's
Yeah, that seems like a pretty good answer.
pretty good answer. I will get it to you. And I just caution you, don't spend a lot of time on it.
Okay,
Okay, now on the first, it's impossible.
yeah,
Pardon?
Yeah.
Between now and the 1st, it's pretty short notice.
Yeah.
So the 98 or whatever it is, 96 page or whatever, what are they asking for our opinion of that overall plan, for the way that it
They want our
meshes
comment.
with our group, or? Okay.
Well, it was a little unclear.
Well, maybe
was-
what you can do is say,
They're
we
sending
give-
it out for review.
Yeah.
And my feeling is, I don't even want to review it.
well, so maybe there's an opportunity, since we didn't get it, to clarify what the input request is, and what they really want and need, because I don't have the time to read a 90+ page document either.
And review.
I had, my wife read it and read it and read it and read it and has lots of opinions about it. But I pretty much said I don't have hours in the day to read it. But I think if what would not be good is to have a document from the commission that in some way is contrary to what we think our recommendations will be and where we're going. So I agree that we don't have to get into the details, but at a high level, I understand there's a section on climate change, Zell. I haven't read it. And, we can take a look at that. And, but we're not going to get into the weeds of this. And if there are some really objectionable recommendations from the commission that are incompatible with where we're going, and I think as a group, we have a pretty good idea where we're going, then we should comment and say that. Maybe we can have a brief discussion about that, but no more than that. The document is far more detailed than we need to get into. So I agree with you, Jesse.
Okay, well, I'll send this out to you all either tonight or tomorrow morning. You can have a look at it, and I'll try to write something up, a 1-page thing to send to them. But before I do that, I'll probably check with each one of you, I guess, if that's agreeable.
Sounds
Yeah,
great.
if you have some headlines and bumper stickers that where you think are really problematic vis-a-vis our,
Yeah, I mean,
then highlight those and then we can look at it with that in mind. And
yeah, I mean, for example, they recommend the town not buy any land that's within the 100-year floodplain. And that is just like, what?
That is like, huh?
Huh?
yeah,
I
that's a
mean-
good example. Yeah.
There's an example. And I
They
just,
recommend against it. It's not that they're silent on it.
pardon?
They actually recommend against it.
Yeah.
You're right.
Now I want to read it. I want to say, what the heck?
Well, it's page 42 if you want to know.
Oh gosh, you're sending me down a rabbit hole here.
Well, okay. So what I may have to do is have to anybody, is it people around next week?
Pretty much.
Yeah, pretty much.
Do you want me to try to set
At
up
least through Wednesday.
Huh?
Wednesday. At least through Wednesday.
through Wednesday?
Mhm.
You want me to try to set up a short special meeting?
No, why don't you just sort of highlight,
Or do you want me to just go ahead and make comments?
just highlight some, as I was sort of suggesting earlier, high-level comments, and that would be one of them. Why not
Yep.
buy in the 100-year floodplain that are of concern to us because of the impacts of climate change?
Right,
Period,
right,
exclamation point.
right.
And then we can, I assume, prove them by email, right? If we need to talk, sure, but
I don't think we need to, I mean, I can, if you authorize me to make the comments on behalf of the task force, I can do it.
happy to.
And we can just do it that way.
How
I'm
about
happy-
doing, if you do it on Tuesday and send a copy of what you got there around to us. And if
Yes.
some of us want to add in a few comments, we'll get them to you before Tuesday.
Okay,
Okay,
okay. I
sounds
can
good.
do Okay,
7 o'clock.
7 o'clock.
I have
Okay.
another meeting, so I have to hang up in a minute. So
Okay.
don't do anything important that I need to minute.
Right.
Can we in general say that this does not ever go beyond 7? I mean, this is a very long time to be on Zoom.
I agree. I've been on Zoom since 8 in the morning.
Yeah.
And I have 2 more hours of it.
Oh
Oh,
my gosh,
gosh.
the poor woman.
Okay, we'll adjourn here in a minute. I just want to tell you that on the transportation stuff, I did get the New London mayor to sign a letter to the governor. I also got the Connecticut Commuter Rail Council to sign a letter to the governor. And then out of the blue, Pfizer sent a letter supporting the train proposal. That's all I know.
Bravo.
So we're
And
moving
the,
forward.
we can add a comment about item C in old business that we did have a meeting between Circa and the town planning
Yes, we did.
commission. And the task force were invited to it. So it was not an official meeting of the task force. It went very well, I think. There was good exchange, and we've heard back from planning. They had some ideas that we're going to be exploring about future presentations to the town council, for example.
Excellent.
Yes. Thank
Good.
you, Frank.
Anything else?
No, you really did a pretty good job of hitting old business, because down the bottom is discuss the task force work plan.
Well, I already hit that.
I think it's been a very productive meeting.
I was just complimenting you.
Been good, guys.
Oh,
Well, thank you all very much. And Mickey, go ahead.
just a quickie in that, in my opinion, the number one thing we can do for resilience, sustainability, and in fact, planet Earth is to have an election in November that
Amen.
that functions.
Exactly.
And the Connecticut legislature is now considering having absentee, no fault or no permission needed absentee ballots, which in my opinion is the only feasible way to hold an election during a pandemic. And although maybe the task force doesn't want to, as a group do this, I hope each one of us will be letting our legislators know that we've got to support
Because the
absentee ballot system.
The Republican Party has now sued the Secretary of State on that. So yes, but it's not the task force, okay?
Well, it's resilience, sustainability, and
Everything.
everything.
It's having a logical, orderly life.
Okay, anybody got any final comments?
I motion that we adjourn.
Thank you,
Okay.
Sarah.
Okay, so we will not have a
Second.
good.
Frank, Frank second.
All right, thank you, Frank.
Under 30 seconds here. We may have a discussion next week. We will not have a regular meeting in July. We probably will have one in August.
Sounds good.
That's good.
Okay.
Say hi to
Good
Liz.
night, everybody.
Thank you all very much.